We're talking about the hidden cost of the AI boom, specifically electricity. How the vast, the seemingly bottomless energy hunger of new data centers is quietly but very rapidly driving up power prices across the U.S.
It's the ultimate clash, isn't it? Intangible progress versus very, very tangible infrastructure. And what's fascinating is that this has instantly leaped beyond being just a technical energy issue.
Right.
It's now a central political flashpoint.
Right.
The sources we have really zero in on this very recent, very high-level friction. We're talking about political demands being placed directly on major tech giant, Microsoft is named, and to handle these massive infrastructure costs entirely themselves.
So our mission today is pretty simple. We want to help you quickly grasp why the electricity needed to run AI, the stuff that's improving search, coding, countless business processes, why that is becoming such a central political and economic issue.
And what fundamental questions it raises about who ultimately pays for all this technological progress.
Exactly. We're going to unpack the specific details of this showdown, look at why U.S. electricity prices are soaring faster than nearly everything else, and examine the fundamental questions tech leaders are now being forced to confront about cost sharing. Let's get into it.
Okay, so to really understand the political reaction, we have to start with the fundamental economic pain point. That's the fuel for this whole conflict. For voters and for consumers, the sources explicitly highlight something pretty troubling. U.S. electricity price increases have actually exceeded the overall inflation rate in the economy.
Wow. Okay, that's a devastating detail.
Wow.
When we talk about inflation, people complain about groceries or gas, right? But those prices can fluctuate.
Sure.
Electricity is a constant. It's a non-negotiable necessity. So to know that the cost of keeping the lights on, of running essential appliances, is rising faster than the general cost of living, that's a unique kind of financial pressure.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it just compounds the dissatisfaction that's already out there. When people are already feeling the pinch from inflation, and then the foundational utility bill comes in higher than ever before, the political pressure just becomes immense.
It makes the cost of living feel unsustainable.
For a lot of families, yes.
So we have this kind of generalized economic anxiety, but we need to connect it back to the AI boom.
Yeah.
How exactly are we linking the rise in my power bill to a new chatbot or an algorithm running in a server farm miles away?
Well, it's a classic infrastructure demand shock. While, electricity costs are influenced by lots of factors, natural gas prices, grid modernization, all that stuff.
Right.
The sheer scale and the rate of construction of new data centers is now widely viewed as one of the primary, identifiable reasons for this really dramatic rise in electricity prices.
Can you quantify that shock for us a little?
Yeah.
We've had tech booms before. We built out fiber cables, 5G networks. How does this AI demand shock compare to, say, the early 2000s tech boom?
It's really incomparable in terms of energy draw. Data centers aren't just warehouses for computers anymore. They are incredibly energy-intensive facilities running specialized chips like GPUs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And critically, they need massive cooling systems.
Of course.
The sources point out that the energy demand for these AI facilities is accelerating much, much faster than utility companies can possibly build new generation or transmission capacity. It's creating localized power shortages and just overwhelming regional grids.
And when supply can't meet that kind of accelerating demand, prices soar, which moves us perfectly into the political arena. When this basic infrastructure cost skyrockets and consumers are hurting, it becomes a front and center political liability.
Exactly. And the sources note that this entire issue, high prices, inflation, assigning blame for it, has been politically activated. It's been seized on by key political players leading up to the November elections as a core argument against the current economic environment.
When the political conversation shifts to utility bills, the issue has gone completely mainstream.
It really has.
And this sets the stage for the specific intervention we saw this week, coming directly from former President Donald Trump. He wasn't talking about general economic malaise. He got very specific.
That's right. On Monday, he announced a clear, specific target for what he called addressing high costs, the electricity sector. He explicitly acknowledged that data centers are crucial for the AI boom. So he's not anti-AI innovation here.
No, he's not against the tech itself.
Right. But he demanded that the large tech companies building these facilities must shoulder the entire expense themselves.
He used that really strong phrase, didn't he? That they must bear the full cost. What's the significance of focusing on the full cost? Did that suggest that traditionally these kinds of costs are often shared by the public grid?
That's the crux of the demand, and it's why it's so politically potent. Historically, large utility users, a factory, a steel mill, a data center, they work with utility providers, and the infrastructure upgrades, like building new power lines, are often integrated into the overall grid costs.
Which are then distributed among all consumers.
Correct. So Trump's demand effectively says, this specific exponential infrastructure demand from AI has to be treated as a private enterprise cost, not a public utility cost. He's saying the transfer of expenses to ordinary consumers has to stop. Now,
So it's a direct attempt at price control, or maybe more accurately, cost allocation control.
Yeah.
The government stepping in and saying, you, the profitable tech giant, you own this expense, not the household down the street.
precisely. And he didn't just leave it as a general critique. He made these remarks on his social media platform, emphasizing that the government is actively working to make sure consumers don't pay for the build-out of these massive data centers.
Right.
It really elevates the issue to a direct policy mandate targeting the biggest names in tech.
And he backed it up with specifics. He said the government had been in discussions with Microsoft about this exact issue. That move places one of the most visible leaders in AI, Microsoft, through their OpenAI partnership, directly under the political spotlight. It's a very tactical move.
And the timing is critical. Our sources really emphasize this connection. This demand for tech giants to pay their own way came just ahead of Trump's plan to visit a Ford facility in Michigan and give a major economic speech in Detroit.
So he's tying the energy cost issue, which hits every single voter, directly into his broader message about American manufacturing and, economic protectionism through tariffs.
It's a comprehensive message, yeah. It's aimed at alleviating voter anxiety about the economy right now. The cost of living is the central pillar of the strategy, and AI's energy hunger is now a perfect target.
A visible corporate behemoth to hold accountable for tangible consumer pain.
Exactly. It lets the political message address both innovation and inflation in a single breath.
Okay, so the pressure is applied. It's public, it's specific, it's politically timed. How did Microsoft, the direct target here, respond?
Well, the sources suggest the pressure seems to be having an effect, or maybe they were already thinking along these lines. Trump claimed that Microsoft will, in fact, make a significant change, although, he didn't offer any specific details on what that change might look like.
So the industry seems to know they can't just ignore this. The focus shifts immediately to the corporate response.
It does. Microsoft's vice chairman and president, Brad Smith, was scheduled to make a highly anticipated public statement at a Washington event right after this political demand. The world was sort of waiting to see if he'd address the challenge directly.
But the real insight for our deep dive, the moment that really reveals the core dilemma for the whole industry, is actually what Microsoft was signaling before all this.
Ah, yeah. Their event teaser.
Exactly. Their teaser raised these fundamental questions that show they were already grappling with this infrastructure problem internally.
And that pre-existing introspection is highly significant. The teaser asked 3 crucial, almost philosophical questions. First, who benefits from AI? Second, what are its potential impacts?
And then the big one.
And then the big one, the most critical question. Who should bear the cost of critical AI infrastructure?
That last question really is the core of it all, isn't it? Why is that specific question, who pays, the linchpin right now?
Because it forces the industry to confront the unsustainability of the current growth model. For years, tech infrastructure was built on an assumption of cheap, readily available power.
Right.
Now, the staggering costs required to sustain this AI explosion are becoming a major line item on corporate balance sheets, and they can't just hide them by shifting them to the local utility grid without a massive public outcry.
So the question itself reveals they know the era of externalizing this cost is probably over.
I think so. It's a pivot point. The cost of AI used to be abstract software development, huge salaries. Now the cost is literally measurable in copper wiring, transmission lines, and rising utility bills.
The problem is moving from a high-tech problem to a fundamental public utility crisis.
And that transition is what makes the political involvement unavoidable. The industry is being forced to internalize the full cost of its own expansion.
Okay, that shift in focus lets us step back and look at the broader physical scale of this energy footprint. Because the pressure on Microsoft and the cost of electricity, this isn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer demand for power is fundamentally rewriting long-held economic assumptions about power supply planning in the U.S.
And the resource strain is generating some really serious warnings that go far beyond just high prices. We're seeing analysis projecting that the AI boom isn't just driving demand, but could trigger a potential copper and electricity shortage crisis.
A shortage of copper. Why copper specifically?
Copper is essential for power transmission, for transformer construction. Every time a new data center demands a massive amount of power, it requires huge amounts of new copper wiring and infrastructure to get that power from the plant to the facility. The scale of the build-out is putting unprecedented strain on the supply chain for this very basic, very essential commodity.
So it's not just a generation problem making enough power, it's a delivery problem. The actual physical wires and substations needed to move it. And the sources warn that this could actually impede U.S. AI development entirely.
That's how serious the physical constraints have become. We're reaching the limits of the existing systems. It's a stark illustration of the principle that digital progress is utterly dependent on analog infrastructure.
Okay, to make this concrete for everyone listening, we need some specific examples of this demand hitting the market right now.
Let's start with regional grids. We have information showing the largest U.S. power grid recently saw its auction prices hit new highs, and this was explicitly attributed to spiking AI electricity needs.
And that's the mechanism, right? That's how those costs get pushed down to every home and business connected to that grid.
That's how it gets socialized.
Yeah.
But to really understand the scale of the challenge, we need to look at regional expansion plans. Consider Texas alone, which is often a bellwether for this kind of thing. The sources cite applications for over 220 gigawatts of massive new projects that are seeking grid connection by 2030.
Whoa, hang on. 220 gigawatts.
Yep.
Can you put that number into context for us? That just sounds astronomical.
Oh, it's colossal. To give you a rough idea, 1 gigawatt can typically power hundreds of thousands of homes.
Yeah.
220 gigawatts is substantially more than the current operating capacity of entire large nations. It represents a massive, unprecedented infrastructure demand that would require staggering amounts of new power generation, new transmission lines, all within just the next 6 years.
And this surge is being overwhelmingly driven by the AI expansion.
It is. That figure, seeking connection in just one state over such a short period, illustrates why the public utility sector is completely overwhelmed. They were planning for linear growth.
And they got exponential growth.
They got exponential growth, driven by the AI boom. It explains why the price increase is moving faster than overall inflation. The demand is unlike anything we've ever seen before.
It's the physical manifestation of the AI boom, forcing this high-stakes confrontation between tech innovation and, fundamental quality of life issues like affordable, reliable power.
That's the core conflict. The promise of AI faster search, new productivity tools, it's often intangible and future-focused, but the cost is immediate and entirely tangible. It's an infrastructure strain, resource scarcity, and the cost per kilowatt hour on your monthly statement.
The question is no longer if we can build the AI future, but how we can pay for the energy that keeps it running. So we've seen a perfect storm develop rapidly. Surging AI demand driving up electricity prices faster than overall inflation. This created major political discontent right ahead of key elections.
Which then led to that specific pressure from the former president on companies like Microsoft to cover the full cost of their crucial data centers.
A move that is now forcing the entire tech industry to address this question of cost allocation directly and immediately.
What really stands out here is that the economic and political costs of sustaining the AI revolution are now visible. They're unavoidable to the public right there on their electric bills. The immediate challenge for governments and corporations is tactical. Who should be financially responsible for this massive infrastructure build-out?
And that leads us to the critical final thought for you to consider based on everything we've looked at. The immediate question is tactical. Who pays for the power lines? But the bigger question remains. If AI benefits society broadly, driving innovation and productivity, and at the same time boosts corporate profits exponentially, how do we fairly manage the massive, disruptive, and tangible costs it imposes on the world's physical grid and the average consumer? Is there a middle ground between shared cost and full self-pay?
The battle over your electric bill is truly a high-stakes battle over the financing structure and the future sustainability of the entire AI economy. Thanks for diving deep with us.